Hello everyone and welcome. My name is JD Grauspitz. I'm lead singer of Malignant Bear, and I'm perhaps foolishly recording back-to-back videos, but I figured this was relevant to my last one that I just did, the Steam review, the Steam sale review rather. This is my 2020 games recap. So I'm going to do this kind of similar to big name YouTuber Video Game Donkey, where he talks about just the games that he played in the current year as his year-end wrap-up. These are not games that came out in 2020. This is just things that I played through this year, things that were in my backlog or that I was curious about. So there is some older games, some new releases, various types of genres, things like that. I'm just going to talk about them. All of these games featured, except one, are on Steam. So I'm going to be showing the Steam pages for those and talking about the discounts on them and if they're worth it. So that's why I wanted to record them now while the Steam sale was going on and put this out at the same time as my Steam sale overview. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first one. So right off the bat, one of the games that I played through this year, or in this case replayed, was Witcher 3. When this first came out 5 years ago, I played through it almost 100% in the span of about 3 weeks and did not touch it since. When this calendar year started, I decided to pick it back up again and play through it on Death March and experience it again and all the DLCs. And I'm very glad I did. It took me about 120 hours this time. Still holds up. Still recommend it, especially at $12. Again, by this point, Witcher 3 has been out for a while. Most people know about it, have opinions on it, things like that. Absolutely fantastic game. Still recommend it. Of course, Cyberpunk, which I'll touch on briefly here, is its own issues. The same developer, their newest project, Cyberpunk, just came out about 2 weeks ago, as of the recording of this video. Very lofty ambitions, lots of expectations for it, both from fans and thanks to their own marketing team. If you have a console, especially one of the older consoles, I would absolutely not recommend Cyberpunk at all. It's basically a slideshow on them, very, very rough. If you have a high-end PC or one of the newer consoles and you think you're interested in it, read some reviews and do some research first. I'm enjoying it. It's a fun world. The main game or the main storyline content in it is very good. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed in how it runs. The missing features, the basic quality of life things, things that they promised and didn't quite deliver on. I'm sure it will be a good game eventually, but I cannot recommend it at the current $60 price. But I just wanted to have that tangent here, given that, again, Witcher 3 from the same developer, CD Projekt Red. I'm still playing through it myself, so it's not in this list, but would be remiss if I didn't mention it. Alright, next up is Grim Dawn. As I mentioned in the Steam sale overview, I backed this on Kickstarter years and years and years ago at this point, so full disclosure on that. I did financially support this game's development. When it came out, I messed around with it a little bit, but didn't end up actually playing through it at the time. Can't remember why. There wasn't anything wrong with it or anything at the time. But I finally sat down, played through it all, including the DLC this year. Highly recommend it. I got about 100 hours out of the game and all the DLC, and you could probably get even more out of that depending on how much you wanted to take the end game and things like that. Tons and tons of content. Very good. It's aged well. Just a blast to play through, either single player or with your friends. Again, looter style game, just like Diablo. Tons and tons of class possibilities. It has a neat system where you can multi-class, which is kind of cool, just like Titan Quest had. You can see this gigantic skill tree, or not skill tree, rather the constellation tree of various passives and other active abilities that you can have to modify your skills. If you love theory crafting in a game like this, this is absolutely one to go for. And again, at $5 for the base game, or a little shy of $30 for the game with all the DLC, highly recommend it. Alright, Fallout 76. I touched on this earlier. This game had a very rough launch when it first came out, and I'd be lying if I had said it wasn't still in a little bit of a rough state. Very buggy. has some jank to it for sure, as Bethesda games do. And unfortunately, because this is an always online game, there is no way around that. There is no unofficial patch or anything like that. So you got to live with what you get. That said, this is Bethesda's best open world, without a doubt. It feels huge. There's so much to do, lots of content, lots of different content. It's very creative. Just everything about it. It feels very real, sort of lived in. If you are a fan of exploration, it's worth it just for that. The gameplay side, little harder sell there for sure. Fallout not exactly known for its combat. You can still VATS in it. It's a little awkward. The gunplay is not the greatest. There's some bugs with monster health jumping back up and things like that. But again, just to play around and explore around in the world, I would say it's cool. Just got a huge update recently where the Brotherhood of Steel came back. I haven't played it yet. I probably will at some point though. But at $13, and there's no monthly fee or anything like that. There's an optional one, but I would not personally go for it. At $13 to see the entirety of post-apocalyptic West Virginia, it's worth checking out. And with another recent update, they made it so that the world scales to your level. So if you jump in the game and you're curious just to see what, for example, Charleston, West Virginia looks like after the bombs fell, you can run straight there, totally fine. So worth it just to scratch that exploration itch. All right, next up, Kingdoms of Amalur: ReReckoning. Quite the title there. This game came out years ago at this point, the original Kingdoms of Amalur, that is. Very infamous development story. The state of Rhode Island helped support the development of this game, and it didn't sell so well. The studio went defunct. There was lots of lawsuits, and it was just sort of left to the wind for a long time. After the studio went bankrupt, THQ Nordic bought the rights to it and re-released it just this past year. It's a solid re-release. It was always a solid game. It's aged well. I was actually completely honest. I was replaying it, the base game, when they announced that ReReckoning was coming out. So I halted my playthrough of that, and then instead just picked it up again when ReReckoning came out and played through most of it again. It does drag a little bit. This is one of those rare games where there's almost too much content. Once you start to get into the end game, you'll have seen pretty much everything, and it's just a bit of a slog to get through. But at $24, it's a solid game. I've always described this as the game that I wished Fable would have been. Not quite from the sort of design perspectives that Peter Molyneux lied about in terms of, the choices you make matter and things like that. But gameplay-wise, this game is fun, enjoyable, pretty mindless, but again, I picked it up as soon as it came out again, just because I was so excited to get to play it again with, some of the bugs and things like that fixed for modern systems. So, all right, Conan Exiles. This is an interesting one for this list. So this is a open world survival game, multiplayer game. Usually there is a single player mode, and that is what I played through actually, and that's why it's in this list. And I know I'll probably get some flack for that because, again, this is meant to be a game you play with a big group of people. You build stuff up, attack your enemies, and defend your settlements, capture your thralls, things like that. Even as a single-player game, though, I was pleasantly surprised with what this game was. Lots of content here, big open world to explore, engaging crafting and building system, some interesting lore, especially if you know about the famous Conan the Barbarian books and or movies. Goes on sale all the time. A lot of DLC for it. It's all just other cosmetics and things like that you can build and craft. The newest DLC is a entirely new map that I messed around with a little bit. Pretty cool. But yeah, lots of content here. Definitely recommend it, especially at $14 if you're into this sort of game. Just be aware that despite it being released now for over 2 years, people still joke that it is an early access game, and it still feels like it in some cases. There is some definite bugs, some jank, things like that. But again, if you're into this sort of game, solid pickup. Next up, we have Neo, and unfortunately, Neo is not on sale, and I can't say I'm surprised. Koei Tecmo, unfortunately, sometimes just doesn't participate in these sales, or if they do, don't put really good discounts on their games, which is a shame because this is one of the best Souls-likes that I have ever played. Takes place in feudal Japan. You play as a Irish pirate who has to travel to Japan to get back his soul bond, basically. And you get drawn into the Warring States period, the ending of the Warring States period, and fight in some famous battles and fight some demons and things like that. Tons of weapon and armor variety, different builds you can do. Great combat style, feels like a good mix of Dark Souls and Ninja Gaiden. Again, no surprise given the team's pedigree and what they were going for. I'm eagerly looking forward to the sequel. It's coming out early next year on PC. Obviously, it's been out on PS4 for a while. I will probably pick that up at full price. That is how much I enjoyed this game. But again, it depends on how much you like that sort of game. It was a little difficult, but if you're into that, I would recommend it. Again, even at the full price. Like I said, I paid $60 for this and did not regret it one bit. All right. And next up, an interesting pick for this list, Enderall Forgotten Stories. This is a total conversion mod for Skyrim, a couple years old at this point. Last year, it got a Steam release as a standalone thing. You just have to have Skyrim to play it. Again, Skyrim, the base Skyrim is like dirt cheap, and then the special edition is what was it, like $15? But you just need the base edition to play this. Once you install it, this does all the mods and unpacking and everything for you to play this. If you are going to play Skyrim in the current day and age, this is probably your best bet. This mod is excellent, significantly more difficult than the base game is. But to go with that, much better writing, better graphics, better gameplay, things like that. Just overall a very enjoyable experience. Still has some jankiness just from being Skyrim, and again the difficulty spike. It's real. This is not a game where you can go in, turn up the difficulty to max because you're a master at Skyrim and just blow through it. This is a pretty long, story-heavy game, but definitely worth checking out, especially for the low price of free if you already own Skyrim, or if you don't. Actually, let's see just how much a base copy of Skyrim is. Oh, so they don't sell it on sale anymore. But I believe if you get the special edition, that still counts. So $16 to get regular Skyrim plus whatever other mods it has plus Enderall. Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem. So this playing this game is what made me play Grim Dawn. If I'm completely honest. I was excited about this game. This was another Kickstarter project. I did not personally back it, but this was another big scale action RPG made using, I believe it's the Crysis engine, or a modified version of it. Very, very graphically pleasing, and that's about it, unfortunately. The story in the game is very cliched and messy. Gameplay-wise, there's some cool things here, some neat elements, but very buggy, still is. They just released a massive new update for it, and it still doesn't fix some of the core gameplay issues. I believe they might be engine related at this point. So even on sale, I would not recommend this, unfortunately. It's not a bad game. It's more so what I would call aggressively mediocre. It's a game that if it was to go on sale for $15 or less and you're a fan of the genre, I would say pick it up. But I would not recommend it at its current price, and certainly not at the full price. So, right. And next up, we have Felseel, the Arbiter's Mark. This is it's a love letter to Final Fantasy Tactics. There's no other way to describe it. This is the best tactics game since Final Fantasy Tactics that I've played. It came out last year, and I got it in a Humble Bundle, I believe, and finally decided to sit down and play through it. Got quite a lot of gameplay out of it, almost 50 hours if I'm remembering correctly. Again, tactics-style gameplay, so if you like that, the kind of slower turn-based methodical strategy, great. Again, It's literally just Final Fantasy Tactics with its own spin on it, its own world. They did a fantastic job with it. There's some replay value to it, tons of different classes and weapons and things like that that you can do. I would recommend this at full price for fans of the series, or fans of the genre rather. But at $10, absolutely worth it. It even got some DLC recently. I didn't play through it, but you can pick up the game with all its DLC for $20. But again, at $10, I got 50 hours out of it. Hard not to recommend that. Right. And I'm going to get some flack for this one for sure. But again, this was games I played through this year. So I got bored, working from home and decided to check out Crush Crush. I had previously played their other game, which was something with cats, I can't remember, and it was really funny, so I figured I would go through and see what else they did, and they did this dating sim. It's an idle game, it's a clicker game, and you literally just click on things and wait for them to happen, and then you go on dates with the characters. The writing in it is very humorous. Obviously raunchy given the subject matter. You can see with the tags here, sexual content and nudity, so not for everyone. But this was a very humorous take on sort of cliched dating games. You can tell the devs had fun with it. They release constant content updates for it, new little things. Free to play. I didn't spend any money on this, and you don't have to. Again, just to go through and kind of see some of the dialogue from some of the characters and the phone conversations and things like that. It's something that you click on and you play for 2 or 3 minutes a day or whatever, if even that. And it's even on phones and stuff like that. So, because I did play through it, or at least check it out for a little bit, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. So, moving on though, we have My Time at Porsche. Normally not a type of game that I would play, but again, this was something I got in a Humble Bundle and decided to check out. It seemed pretty nice and relaxing, and it certainly is. Seems a little disingenuous of them to show all the combat in the screenshots. There's not a whole lot of it. The crux of the gameplay here is exploring, building and crafting, and social interactions with the town. So this is basically a 3D Stardew Valley. There's all sorts of, you collect things to build different things for your farm or for the townsfolk, to build up your relationships with them and get to know them and go through the story and world. This was a very fun, very cute game. It could be a little aggravating. The crafting, here we'll pull up, oops, that was not the one I wanted. The crafting system, as you can see just from this, these are some of the earlier things in the game that you can build. There's quite a lot of materials that go into this. There's a lot of waiting around for things to happen. So if that bothers you in a game, don't check this out. But I was pleasantly surprised by this as someone who doesn't usually go towards these sorts of games. And the writing was very solid. Very, very heartwarming characters, very fun, enjoyable world. Currently on sale for $10. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And they are also working on a sequel right now. Just recently had a Kickstarter that finished, set in the same universe. So I'll probably be picking that one up when it comes out. All right. And here we have a fun title, Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr, and its standalone sequel, Inquisitor Martyr. Was it Prophecy, I believe? They're bundled together nowadays. This is another action RPG. I played quite a few of them this year. Again, partly because I played Wolcen early on and was disappointed and sort of wanted to get the taste of that out of my mouth. This came out a couple years ago, but just now played through it. This is made by the same developers who did the Van Helsing games of action RPGs a couple years ago. And as you can tell, obviously set in the 40k universe. You play as an Inquisitor, and you exterminate Xeno scum, basically. The story is over the top and cringy in the best ways, because it is 40k. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they ran with it, and I'm glad they did. The gameplay is very visceral. The environments and sound design is great. You really feel like you're there. The downside is the environments and everything gets a little samey. You're basically just running through corridors, some more open areas, for hours and hours and hours. If you don't mind that, there's a lot of content here, a lot of gameplay. They do seasonal events similar to other games in this genre, different loot to get, different builds to try out, things like that. I enjoyed it. Again, I'm a big fan of the genre and a big fan of the franchise, or the 40k franchise, that is. So worth checking out if you're into that. But if you're not, I would say Grim Dawn is probably a better bet. All right. Next up, we have Shadows Awakening. This was an interesting game. Again, something I got in a humble bundle and decided to check out. Currently on sale for $12, and for that, I think I would recommend it. This is a third-person sort of hack and slash RPG with some puzzle elements and some almost tactical combat. You control your entire party at once by switching between them in combat, and that's how you traverse the world, deal with the puzzles, have combat, build up your own combos. It's a little hard to explain, but it's very cool in practice. Game has some definite downsides, though. The loot is incredibly boring, and the development of this game was a bit of a mess. This is technically a sequel to Shadow's Heretic, which is the exact same game, except half as long. So they put out the original Shadows, couldn't finish it, sold it anyways to basically give them the time to finish it as Shadows Awakening. So if you see the other game in the series, Shadows Heretic, Heretic Kingdoms, or whatever it is, avoid it. Pick this one up instead because it's the actual complete game. But even with that, you can tell that it's still not quite done. There's some definite cut corners towards the end, some annoying backtracking, things like that. It clocks in about 20 hours though, and I enjoyed it. And at $12, it was a fun experience. So worth checking out if you think that sounds fun. All right, moving on, we have Bloodstain, Ritual of the Night. This was another big Kickstarter success story. I did not personally back it, although I wish I had because this was absolutely fantastic. This is a Metroidvania made by the godfather of the genre, Koji Igarashi. He's the man who created Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and this was his attempt to sort of get back into the game, and it's a faithful recreation of it. With it's a Castlevania game with RPG elements. There's some crafting, gear, things like that. Huge map, lots of different puzzles and enemy and boss variety. This was a blast to go through. Has tons of replay value, and they're adding more things to it constantly, still getting updated. I believe just last week they added another character that you can play as. So there's at least 3 or 4 in the game, and I think there's another one coming out. There's a randomizer mode, there's a speedrun mode. If you are a fan of Metroidvanias, I mentioned Hollow Knight in the previous video about the Steam sale as being quite a good one. I think this might be the pinnacle of the genre, though. If I was to give a Game of the Year award, for me, this would be it. But again, came out last year. It just happened to be something I played this year. But yeah, this might have been the most fun I had with the game this year. But I am a big fan of Castlevania games, so. But yeah, absolutely worth it at $16. So. Along that same vein, another sort of Metroidvania. It's a Metroidvania, but it leans a little closer to Dark Souls in terms of kind of tone and gameplay and things like that. Salt and Sanctuary. Again, this aimed to be a 2D Dark Souls, which is kind of funny because Dark Souls is essentially just a 3D Metroidvania, but it's everything cycles back around eventually. This game was good for what it was. It's quite short. I 100%ed it, I think, on accident. My first playthrough, it was only about 10 hours. You can replay, do New Game Plus, things like that. For $5 though, I would say it's worth it. Again, provided you like that. It was more difficult than Bloodstained was for sure. But neat world, solid combat, lots of gear choices, things like that. Not quite as as puzzle oriented as a standard Metroidvania. This one leans much harder on the combat. So if you played Bloodstain and Hollow Knight and things like that and struggled with those combat wise, maybe pass on this one. Another one this year, and I, again, similar to Crush Crush, I debated not putting this one in, but again, I did play it this year. World of Warships. So this is a free-to-play game where you control sort of World War II era, slightly before and slightly after as well, warships, and get in these big sort of tactical battles. This was really fun up until a point. Then you get to the sort of higher level matches, and then it just becomes a slog where people that have obviously spent way more money on the game than you are just kind of sniping you from across the map with their way better ships. There's some matchmaking to prevent that, and I did enjoy, I still enjoyed it, still had fun with it. It was cool seeing some of the ships and things like that. But it's tricky to recommend. Again, fun game, enjoyable game, especially if you go in with your friends and things like that. But yeah, you will get to a point where it's just, as a free-to-play game, you will hit the paywall where the other free-to-play people have probably dropped off. So, all right. Outside of that, we have the Master Chief Collection, and I touched on this earlier. So I used to be really big into Halo. Still enjoy the game, certainly. So when this went on sale earlier this year, I picked it up and decided to play through Halo Reach for the first time. I never had a 360, unfortunately, so did not get to play through it at the time. But I figured I'd pick it up, and eventually I will go through the other Halo games. I'll probably stream them, actually. There's some good content there. But this is an excellent pickup. As I said, huge value proposition, even at full price, $40 for 6 full campaigns plus all their multiplayers. Can't be beat. The only downside, and I touched on this briefly, is some of the porting efforts were a little bad. The PC port of Reach, at least at the time of my playing through it, hopefully they've fixed it by now. The enemy AI and guns are tied to the frame rate, so if you have the game set to just 30 FPS, everything's fine, you won't notice any problems. If you play at 60 FPS, you are effectively doubling the difficulty of the game. I played through Reach on Legendary, and I never dropped below 100 FPS, and that was one of the most frustrating gaming experiences of my life. I did finish it, but I would not recommend anyone else try that. It is brutal unless they've patched it. Again, Reach and all the Halo games, very solid, fun campaigns. But yeah, I would maybe do some research if you're looking to go through and play them that way. They all have co-op as well. Unfortunately, the co-op for Reach still had that same issue. Was very difficult. Tried that with a friend, and we had some problems still. The multiplayer, thankfully, does not have that problem. So if you're just in it for that, can't think of a better pickup. Again, for $24, tons of Halo multiplayer. And here we have another 2D Metroidvania, sort of an older style game, Blasphemous. And this was another one that came out around the same time, actually, as Bloodstained. And this is, again, it's the older style, so there's not as much RPG elements. This is just pure raw skill for the most point, getting through this game. Really cool world, level design, a little bit of lore, sort of like the super gothic religious aspects to it. Very grim game. Lots of gore, lots of violence. There's some nudity in it as well, so if you're alarmed by any of that, possibly skip this one. Very difficult as well, especially towards the end. Even getting all the upgrades I could, the next to the last boss fight in this game was rough. It took me quite a few tries, but still I got quite a lot of gameplay out of it, and would highly recommend it if you're interested in things like that, and especially for $12.50 right now. It also is part of a bundle with Bloodstained. You can get both of them for $25. Absolutely worth picking up, again, if you are a fan of 2D Metroidvanias. All right, another one that I debated not putting in this list, Middleearth Shadow of War, and I didn't want to put it in the list because this was the only game in this list that are well, there's two games in this list that I didn't finish, and this was one of them. So Middle-earth Shadow of War. I loved Shadow of Mordor, and I picked this up dirt cheap in some sale and played through it this year for about 15 hours and then stopped because it just sort of got tiring. Um, they tried to make it bigger and more expansive, and it sort of works, sort of doesn't. Um, the combat is almost exactly the same as Shadow of Mordor, except there's a lot more enemies. They have a lot more sort of resistances and things like that. That just makes fighting them honestly a slog. Um, and that was what finally killed it for me. As I realized, I was like, okay, I took too long to just kill this standard enemy, even doing everything right, even understanding the mechanics, and just sort of gave up with it. And again, I loved the first game. I love Lord of the Rings as a series, as a franchise, things like that. So I was a little disappointed in that. Um, but if you think you can get past that, or you just kind of want to check out, some of the content in the game, $10 is a great price for it at that. I believe I picked it up for $5, so it has dropped lower before, and it goes on sale pretty frequently, given that it is a couple years old at this point. Another game, Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. This is an early access title. Um, it released in early access this year. I loved Warband, so I picked this up as soon as it came out and messed around with it for almost 20 or 30 hours. This is a pretty good sequel, but again, it's an early access title. Still needs more time in the oven. Most people will say that. Had some serious issues when it came out. Haven't really touched it since the spring, so I'm not sure what's been fixed. But again, it has had frequent updates, and it will get more. Even when I stopped playing it, it had already had quite a few mods and fan patches and things like that. So this is a great game if you're into that, if you're into sort of the large scale battles and things like that. As you can see, this is not, they call them bull shots, where, sort of fake screenshots of a game. This is something you can actually do in game. You can have these massive cavalry charges, and it does feel really cool and fun. Single player and multiplayer. Single player storyline is a little bare bones, but there will be one eventually. Very cool game and concept, but again, just needs more work. So if you're not a fan of early access, maybe hold off for now. But right, another older game, Night in the Woods. This is a story-heavy, light action or light platformer, and it's again just all about the story. I loved this game. Came out a couple years ago. Decided to finally play through it this year, just because I had some downtime. It is set in sort of a decaying Rust Belt town, all about a girl coming home from college after dropping out and kind of reconnecting with her old friends and working through some troubles. It's a very intriguing and touching story. Lots of great little character developments, lots of neat little details, things like that. At $12, if that sounds intriguing to you, I would recommend it. The soundtrack was also excellent. There's some little mini games, like their version of Guitar Hero in the game, which was kind of neat. Fairly short and not really any replay value. Well, I suppose a little bit. But again, story driven, so if that interests you, maybe check it out. All right, next up we have Hellpoint. This was an indie Souls-like that came out earlier this year in the summer. And it was enjoyable for what it was. This was another game that kind of got tiring after a certain point. One of those games where it's like, all right, I get the point. I don't need to see this through to the end. I did, but it's not as in depth as I would have liked it to be. Fantastic first effort from these developers. I loved what they were going for. Like the world design and everything was really cool. And again, as an indie game, hard to knock them too much. But having played having played Neo previously, probably soured me on this a little bit, if I'm being completely honest. Not a bad game by any means, and it's gotten some patches and things since I played it to fix some of the jankiness and some of the bugs. So if you're into that sort of thing, very cool, especially for $20 right now. But again, if you're not a fan of Souls-likes, for example, maybe skip on this one. All right. Next up, we have Iratus, Lord of the Dead, and this is it's Darkest Dungeon from reverse. If I'm completely honest, that's what it is, and I love it for that. So instead of raiding the crypts and dealing with the insanity mechanic and things like that, like Darkest Dungeon does, you are a necromancer, and you and your minions are coming out of the crypts and dealing with the adventurers that are down there exploring. You get your units by crafting them from various pieces of things that you gather from enemies that you kill. So there's interesting little crafting system with that. Lots of neat undead enemies and things like that that you can build up and level up, and they have skill trees and all that sort of stuff. Lots of depth here if you want to explore it. Very cool character designs, world designs, stuff like that. Replay value as well. It is a little bit difficult. At the harder difficulties especially, you basically have to follow a guide. I'm hoping they fixed that with some balance patches. But if you were a fan of Darkest Dungeon at all, I would recommend picking this up. Definitely at $15 as it is on sale right now. Again, you can see some of these monster designs, both yours and the enemies. Very cool, sound and enemy design. So worth checking out if you were into that. Right, next up, we have yet another Metroidvania. So this was one that I picked up because it was on sale, even cheaper than this before. It's $1.60 right now, and that is not a typo or anything. I picked it up for I think like 50 cents at one point. And this is a love letter to the Vanillaware games, so Dragon's Crown, Odin Sphere, things like that. This was just a small indie dev decided they wanted to try their hand at doing that, and I believe they certainly succeeded, at least in terms of look. They nailed the aesthetic they were going for, and even the gameplay as well. I wasn't expecting much from this game, given the price tag and the fact that I think this is still the only thing this developer has done. This game was fantastic, fan service aside on some of the characters, but again, that's the Vanillaware aesthetic that they're going for. If you think this is bad, maybe don't look at Dragon's Crown. But yeah, this was a blast to play through, even if the story and everything was a little cliched. They 100% nailed everything they were going for, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I got almost 15 hours out of it, again for 50 cents. If you're interested in this style of game, this action hack and slash with some light RPG elements, even at full price, highly recommend it. All right, next up, this was the other game that I did not finish this year, Outward. I was very, very interested in this. This was supposed to be an intense open world RPG, where the survival mechanics mattered and things like that, and very engaging and fun combat. And it does have that, but almost too much of that. There's a delicate balancing act in a game like this where you need to combine the serious and intensive elements with fun gameplay and keep in mind that it is a game and things like that. And I don't know that they did it. And that's, again, this is just my opinion on the matter. This is not a bad game by any means. If you are interested in this, a very serious, kind of slow and methodical game where you need to plan things out and all that, fantastic for that. But as someone who is maybe looking for something like this but slightly more accessible, I was a little turned away. And I'm sure people will rag on me, filthy casual and things like that. Again, not a bad game. I certainly appreciated what it was going for. But in a year where I was just trying to clear things out of my backlog, I could see where I was going to have to go with this game, and it just sort of frustrated me, so I dropped it. If you're into that, it frequently goes on sale for about $12, and some other content creators have made exhaustive reviews about it, where they go a little bit more into detail about it and the problems that it might have. Just outside of the difficulty, it does have some bugs, does have some jankiness, things like that. So keep that in mind if you're going into it. It is still getting content updates though, which is a good thing. So again, if you're curious, might be right up your alley. And here we have the last action RPG in the list. Again, this was one that I played years and years ago, Sacred 2. It came out back in 2012, and I decided to reinstall, see how it held up, just kind of mess around with it a little bit after I played through the others in the list, just because I remembered it existed. Took some doing to get it to play again. It needs a fan patch and some other things to get it to work on modern systems and to unlock the expansion content. But I'm hoping that THQ Nordic will actually do something with the series, because just like Kingdoms of Amalur, they vacuumed this property up a couple years ago and are just kind of sitting on it at this point. This game was very ahead of its time when it came out. Still holds up graphically, if I'm honest. It's a little hard to tell from the screenshots, but still looks pretty solid even 8 years later, especially for an action RPG where there's a lot of things going on. Tons of loot variety, build variety, things like that. Massive open world. The writing is a little cheesy. This was made by a European dev, German dev, and translated, and so there's some jankiness with the writing and dialogue and things like that. But you can tell they definitely had fun with it. So if you're at all interested in that, at $4, pretty good price there for sure. But again, older game, and you do have to mess with it literally just to get it to run. So again, at that price, I would say save up the extra $1 for Grim Dawn and just play that instead. All right, and No Man's Sky. So I said, as I mentioned, this came out a couple years ago. Had tons and tons of issues when it launched. Missing content, bugs, lack of features, lack of polish. You name it, this game had it. Credit where credit is due to the developers. They have stuck with it and are still releasing massive free content updates for it. I did not play it when it came out, but several friends did and did not recommend it. And at the recommendation of one of them this year, after the most recent big patch came out, I decided to pick it up, and I definitely enjoyed it. As I mentioned in the other video, this is sort of it's almost Minecraft in terms of like you manipulate the world around you, except it's not with individual cubes. It's sort of larger scale than that. Build things, gather things for your spaceship to fly around and go to new planets. The core gameplay loop can get a little repetitive, because that's pretty much all it is just you go to a planet, harvest the resources you need to either build things there if you want to, which is kind of pointless because what you really want to be doing is just keep traveling. So there is lots of other features and things like that nowadays, but yeah, that sort of remnant of the core gameplay loop is still sort of the biggest stumbling block. There's not much incentive to like stick around on a planet and try to build up a bunch of things and just explore one environment. The core draw, the feature of the game is to travel around and just see other things, and it's gorgeous to look around and see things and stuff like that. The soundtrack is great too, and at $30, if that interests you, I would say go for it. Again, still gets content updates, all of them free, and I would definitely recommend this with a VR headset. Even just without one, it's an incredibly immersive game, very cool. But if you have one, I can't even imagine how fun it would be. Right, and the last title on Steam is Helltaker. So I mentioned this earlier. This was a sort of meme puzzle game that came out in May, totally free. It's up for Best Soundtrack, which, again, I don't really remember the soundtrack to it. But similar in vein to Crush Crush, and I believe actually playing this is one of the reasons why I checked out Crush Crush, because I think it was a recommendation from this. I saw the memes about this, decided to jump into it. It's about an hour of gameplay, if that. But it's literally just some really basic puzzles and then some really cheesy dialogue as your character, who is totally legally distinct Duke Nukem in a three-piece suit, travels to hell to pick up demon women. And it's cheesy, it's over the top, it's fun, and at the low price of free, hard not to recommend. But again, it only has like an hour of gameplay tops, but just for the humor of it, I'm curious to see what, if anything, this dev will do afterwards, because again, this was enjoyable, free, and you can pay $10 to get the art book for it with a pancake recipe, which is a joke from the end of the game. So All right, so that is it on Steam. Last but not least, and I didn't have a window prepared for it, and again, I'll probably get some flack for it, but another game that I sunk some hours into this year was Genshin Impact. Of course, the big Chinese open world gacha game, action game. People have described it as just Breath of the Wild with waifus, and it is at its core sort of that. But Breath of the Wild, I think, maybe with better combat. But it still has a massive open world. It was fun just to mess around with it. You can go into it completely free to play. It's on PS4, phones if you feel like melting your phone, or PC. Again, not on Steam, but it's worth checking out. I think if you enjoyed Breath of the Wild or just open world games in general, or if you feel like you can support another gacha game and want to do that for whatever reason. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, gotten many hours of fun out of it. At the time of recording this video, they literally just released a big content update for it that I will check out at some point. But again, just exploring the world, going around, even just with the free characters that you get just for playing through it, you can have a lot of fun. So it's hard not to recommend it. And again, it does run on phones, albeit not very well. So even kind of a mid-range computer, you can run it. And I think it's locked to only 30 FPS too, so it doesn't matter. You know, if your computer can run, Minecraft, it can probably run Genshin. So that's it for my 2020 games recap. Again, just the things that I played this year, most of them to completion. A couple, sort of ongoing things, or things that I didn't complete, and I stated the reasons for that. And again, like I said, similar to some other YouTubers, I didn't want to just pick out games from this year. Although a good portion of these were 2020 releases, some of them were older games that I just played through. I won't give a specific game of the year. I think that would be sort of a little disingenuous. But out of the games I played, my top 3 for the year, if I had to pick them, was definitely Bloodstained, Neo, and probably Genshin. Again, none of them are particularly groundbreaking or exciting, but they excel very much at what they do, and they're worth checking out. Again, Neo, unfortunately, not on sale. Doesn't seem to go on sale. So hopefully the sequel, from everything I've heard, is even better. So I'm looking forward to that. Bloodstained goes on sale frequently. Highly recommend that. Again, if I was to pick a single game of the year, that would probably be it, but it's a tough call between that and Neo. And Genshin, of course, free to play. If you don't want to support the gacha model or things like that, absolutely understandable. But if you enjoy it for what it is, you can have some fun with it without spending a dime. So, hope this was informative and interesting. And hope you played some good games this year, and hope there's even better ones coming out in 2021. But yeah, keep on having a good time, playing some fun games. Let me know what you played in the comments if you feel like sharing, and have a good one.